Thank you very much. Good day, everybody. I apologize for the slight delay here this morning, this afternoon, wherever you all may be. My name is Dr. Rizvi, and I'm going to walk you through project fraud today, a rather interesting and hot topic out there in the market nowadays. And we're going to walk through some key strategies for how we can tackle this significant topic nowadays with, everything going on in the cybersecurity space and really at a global phenomenon. The amount of waste and rework that this is causing it will be the focus of my discussion today. So the agenda, again, we'll do a quick round of welcome. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. We'll focus right in on the topic itself, which is what is project fraud. We want to define that from both a practical and academic perspective. And then we want to talk about some strategies for project fraud prevention, as well as is there something beyond prevention that we should do as well. We'll talk about that, and then we'll wrap it up with any questions that you all may have for me. So I've presented for the Madinah Institute before, so I appreciate the opportunity yet again from Mr. Jaffrey. I'm just going to keep it brief. Some of you may have heard me before. I'm associated with the AAA Institute as well as Global PM. Both of these entities are based out of Southern California. I'm a professor at several universities, an author, and I also do some judging for a couple of renowned entities. I have a couple of books out. One is actually launching in June 2016, the Lean Six Sigma. My risk management professional book is already out for those of you who are interested in attaining a risk designation. And a really interesting project I'm working on right now with PMI AGC in your region is a PMP exam prep guide, which we hope to launch in the next couple of months. Alrighty. So let's get down to the topic itself, fraud. Before we talk about project fraud, let's understand what fraud itself is. Right? So fraud, the exact definition out of the law dictionary is as follows. Fraud consists of some deceitful practice or willful device resorted to with intent to deprive another of his right or in some manner to do him an injury. That sounds like a legal statement. The basic statement here is that as opposed to negligence, you could be, for example, negligent, you could be grossly negligent. Again, some of these are legal terms. Here, there's a willful intention to do an injury. There's a willful intention to cause someone injury here. That's the premise of fraud in some capacity here. And we'll keep that in mind as we work through the remaining content today. So from fraud now, we're going to focus on project fraud, okay? And the key elements that, several, I've seen referred to some papers out there and seen what steps can we do to partake in preventing project fraud. The key elements that are talked about here that exist around project fraud is, number one, there's typically a misrepresentation of the project's mission itself to secure project financing. So, it may be the business case, perhaps the feasibility study that we're doing for the project is being embellished, is being exaggerated, is being presented in a more favorable manner than the actual realistic projections are. Again, I'm sure many of us have seen this, unfortunately, in our professional lives. The reporting of inaccurate progress of the project. Again, here with the willful intention to conceal project delays, to conceal budget overruns. When we're deliberately forecasting the cost of completion, in an inaccurate manner to avoid reporting lower project profitability. Again, we're trying to report this right now. Ultimately, unfortunately, it may get caught, and I'll talk a little bit about that later as to what drives project fraud within organizations. We'll keep that in mind. overestimating the value of changes. So there's scope creep, there's gold plating going on, there are approved changes that under the guise of the formal change management plan is going through the project, is being added to the baseline, and we're again overestimating and forecasting more value from a change than the realistic forecast is. Misuse of project resources, that's a big one obviously. The improper relationship with project vendors, where we are forgetting our fiduciary duties and looking for personal enrichment there. And another big factor that's quite common out there is substituting specified equipment and material with lower quality alternatives. This, unfortunately, while I don't want to pick on a particular industry, is quite common in the construction space across the globe. So these are some of the key elements of project fraud itself. So, things like bid rigging, which, again, Sarbanes-Oxley and elements like that have tried to step in to prevent. In the United States, and again, those are some globally influencing regulations. Kickbacks, again, something that is a prevalent practice that we are trying to get away from in certain sectors, as well as just misdirecting and confusing the message so that participants, key stakeholders are deliberately confused about what may be going on within a project. With information that's being camouflaged, presented in a more favorable light than what the realistic metrics are showing. Again, presenting data in an objective manner that actually may not have the reliable information behind it to support the case. Now, the question that arises is, why do employees get involved in project fraud? I mean, what drives some of this? And an interesting study done by the PSA group. The PSA group, just so you know, is an entity that was started by a gentleman who retired from the CIA, and he has, he's passed away since then. But this gentleman actually collected a group of experts. They are lawyers and forensics experts and folks from the military with a military background, CIAs, CFAs, ACFEs, those type of certified individuals are part of the team that the late Scott Harrison put together. They have some research on their website that shows that a lot of project fraud emanates from simple, basic elements, such as employees just not wanting to report bad news or information. This was a real shocker when I was researching for this presentation. I found that to be quite eye-opening. It's a simple discomfort of employees not wanting to report bad news or information up the food chain that sometimes causes project fraud. It's something to think about. Another factor that Mr. Harrison's team put together says that poor planning and supervision that would lead to project rework is another factor that induces and introduces project fraud. So poor planning, which again, the Project Management Institute, for example, out of the 47 processes that they teach in their PMBOK guide, they have 24 out of the 47 processes focused on planning. Again, there's got to be deliberate, careful, rational planning with checks and balances in place. And this brings into play the 7 Ps, which is quite famously known out there. The proper prior planning prevents poor performance, period. So interestingly, now rework, which causes us to go over the schedule, which causes us to go over the budget, introduces quality concerns, demotivates employees. A number of these factors around rework introduce elements and openings and opportunities for employees to consider entering into the arena of fraud. Alrighty, so project fraud prevention is most definitely a critical success factor, right? It is vital for projects to have a fraud prevention plan in place. This should tie in with an enterprise fraud risk management strategy. But for our projects in particular, we have to have a unique fraud prevention plan in place, because every project by its very nature tends to have something unique about it. So you need to have a slightly customized, tailored fraud prevention plan in place. And the data around it, again, is quite startling and scary, frankly speaking. The Association for Certified Fraud Examiners, their 2014 report reveals that fraudulent activities last an average of 18 months before they're detected in an organization. So 18 months is a long time. You know, in today's world where we're traveling on Twitter time and Google time and Facebook time, 18 months is an extensively long period of time. So I'm going to walk you through 6 strategies for project fraud prevention. Okay. The first one is to get to know your project team members. As opposed to working with a real arm's length relationship, the project leaders need to step up and develop relationships, cultivate and nurture a sense of comfort with their team members, and get to know your participants, your associates, your experts who are coming onto the table, those who you are delegating responsibility to, especially those who are going to be dealing in the procurement arena, who are going to make critical decisions that may involve internal and external parties, especially around financial transactions. You know, those are some of the obvious places. Those are places where, you know, you would want to definitely get to know your team members, because, you know, many a times fraud perpetrators will display certain traits that sort of give themselves away in some ways. You've got to, again, stay engaged with employees, have an open door policy where, you know, participants and associates are willing to identify potential project risks in general, and specifically project fraud risks. Okay, so you've got to get to take the time to know them. Again, you want to look for certain cues, certain times an employee attitude in particular can clue you into elements of project fraud. If you're seeing suddenly that it appears that the lifestyle of a particular associate on the team is not matching their remuneration package, that may be an indication, again, that something may be amiss here. Bottom line, get to know your project team members. That's the first strategy. Strategy number 2 is to invest in the training and the awareness around fraud prevention. Okay? There's a significant message when the employees are aware, number 1, that someone is watching over them, and number 2, there's a significant message when employees who have every intention of remaining ethical and being ethical do not negligently or accidentally enter into an area where there may be some legal issues, right? And number 3, there's the advantage of once you have invested in a program and you've built the awareness, then there's perhaps more of a willingness to share concerns around fraud from the employees. So, you know, the fraud policy should include, and the training should include, conversation on the types of fraud, the consequences associated with them, whether it's civil liability, criminal liability. The whole message is that this is a message of deterrence. Okay? Deterrence is perhaps the best mechanism amongst many to contain and control and mitigate project fraud. When there is a sense that participants are being watched, when there is a sense that there is some oversight, even that perception alone creates a significant deterrence. You know, employees should be made aware of possible signs of project fraud, what to look out for. Again, over 40% of fraud has been prevented or detected because of an internal tip, typically, okay, as reported by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners from 2014. Now, internal tips are not the only source, so you actually build a relationship with your partners, with your vendors. You build alliances. You even sit on committees and collaborative boards with your competitors, other industry members, to make sure that you're aware of what's going on and out there, and so that you get tips perhaps from other sources as well. And of course, you want to consider setting up an anonymous reporting system where employees, associates, team members, and others, contractors, vendors, are comfortable reporting concerns around project fraud. Again, they may be more comfortable doing it in an anonymous manner because there are fewer concerns of backlash or any of those types of concerns. So our first strategy was to get to know our employees. Number two, we're going to invest the dollars in building a robust awareness plan. We're going to invest in the training to prevent project fraud. Number three, we're going to implement internal controls, checks and balances, things that Sarbanes-Oxley teaches us, the IFRS standards teach us. Segregation of duties is an important element here. Again, reliable documentation, the whole traceability of changes, the whole traceability of the financial transactions become important here. Again, these internal controls are going to be monitored for continuous improvement as changes happen to regulations, as industry trends change, as technology improves. Again, the whole cyberspace, for example, right now is a hot topic and a significant concern. That's an area that we would want to keep a close eye on and make sure that we are proceeding along comfortably with that. Okay, and of course, we're going to rely on experts, right? Again, I take you back to the PMBOK guide from the Project Management Institute. One of the most popular tools and techniques of that book is subject matter experts, or what they call expert judgment. So here as well, we're going to rely on project fraud experts, be they CFEs, CPAs, certified financial forensics folks, you name it. They need to work in partnership with the project management offices that we have established to build in anti-fraud policies and procedures specifically for projects, checklists that will track for risks related to project fraud itself. Again, especially when we're dealing with external parties and vendors. That is when this becomes especially important and prevalent. Again, fraud experts can provide a wide range of services, right? They can, whether it's complete internal control audits to forensic analysis of data, both prevention level and detection level analysis, and other consultation that you can rely on these experts for. So it is an important resource that you want to consider both internally as well as externally to bring in project fraud experts for your more complex and complicated projects. Strategy number 5 is to lead by example, and what the agile world calls reward desired behavior. So A, you're going to lead by example, so you will set the tone with a clear message that you will lead ethically, that your interactions will be perceived to be ethical in nature with the various other stakeholders and participants that you are dealing with as a project leader. And the key core project team, the project management team, so that may be some senior executives, the project manager, maybe a senior project coordinator. Those participants who have a little bit more visibility in front of the team need to in particular lead by example. And then the second part of this is to reward desired behavior. Those employees who are behaving in a very careful, responsible manner around project fraud prevention need to be rewarded, need to be recognized, and that behavior then encourages others and incentivizes others to also follow through. We want to have a clear decision-making structure where, again, there are checks and balances in place. We will incorporate written policies and procedures, formal written policies and procedures that the employees will understand, the employees will incorporate and sign, and it would be part of their orientation, part of the HR, inducement process at the beginning for employees who are coming on board as new employees. We want to have an open door policy in general for any type of risk management. Effective risk management in general requires an open door policy where employees are comfortable and the key core team members are comfortable in communicating with management and sharing concerns, sharing red flags, sharing warning signs and symptoms and triggers. We want to do the same thing with fraud as well. We want to have that same risk management strategy where we are comfortable sharing concerns, sharing thoughts and ideas and suggestions. So again, as I said earlier, project leaders and senior management really need to lead by example and reward desired behavior here. So these are the 5 strategies. Now we come to number 6, which is, frankly speaking, repeating strategy number 1. I re-emphasize, know your project team members. This is perhaps the most important of all, right? When you get to know your project team members and you are familiar with their what we call the norming, in the human resource management world, they call it norming, where you get to know your team where there's a sense of trust and camaraderie being built. Many times this reveals other issues that may need to be addressed from an HR perspective, from a motivation perspective. Perhaps certain employees are feeling burnt out. Perhaps others are feeling they're not being rewarded fairly. A number of other concerns can rise, and this can lead to, by managing some of these concerns, you can actually build a stronger project culture. But nonetheless, this is an important trigger sometimes that reveals clues about someone or a group of participants intending to enter into a fraudulent series of activities. And really, the comment I make here is, as the employee you least expect that commits the crime. So again, there's a case study on the PSA website that talks about a European manufacturer based out of China, where the entire middle management team was involved in fraudulent activity. Okay, the entire middle management team. The executive chambers were clueless, and the only clue they got at the tail end was when the middle manager resigned, and along with her took 7, 8 other employees, all leaving at the same time. Those are cues that there may be a concerted effort here to hide your tracks, and that would be a significant concern to unearth. So, is fraud prevention now? We've talked through 6, I say, but really 5 strategies, because number 1 has been repeated for us. Besides these 6 project fraud prevention approaches, is there anything else that we should do? Well, like it or not, some fraud will escape, right? And we need to also have project fraud detection tools in place, project fraud detection mechanisms in place. So, we also need to take that into account. We need to be aware of the specific local and regional legislation and laws and regulations that we can leverage in this particular space. As much as we don't like talking about these things, this is an important area that we must get familiar with. Again, especially with the whole cybersecurity space, I think really growing and evolving. I see that as a significant area for opportunities and concerns. In our near future. In fact, it's already here. I don't think it's in the future. We really have to keep a close eye on that particular space. So detection mechanisms are also required. And there are a lot of automated tools that can help with some of this. Reporting tools, control charts are the type of tools that you would use here to detect project fraud as well. The bottom line is we must take action, right? We need to sometimes take very explicit open action to convey a message. Sometimes we'll take quiet steps because our reputation and brand may be at stake, but other times, wherever possible, we'll make a lot of noise when we take steps, because we want to create a message, we want to convey a message that we will not take fraud lightly around projects. So again, any potential concerns that we may have around fraud on projects, we will take significant action and make a lot of noise around that. We will leverage the laws and regulations that give us the power and the authority and the influence to take steps against those perpetrators, those fraudsters who are causing damage to our projects. Look, the bottom line is, from a societal perspective, if you think about it, project fraud causes damage that hurts stakeholders at large, from a community perspective, from a societal perspective, from a national, regional perspective. It causes damage that stays. Our products end up costing. As consumers, we end up paying more because of fraudulent activities. We end up perhaps getting services delayed because of fraudulent activities. We miss out on features and functionality because of fraudulent activities. Sometimes projects do not reach their full fruition because of fraudulent activities. So again, these are a number of reasons why we need to take very strong action to ensure that we're getting the value that we deserve for the investments we're making in our projects. So, there are a number of things, as I said, that we want to look at. We want to, number one, from a prevention perspective, get to know our employees. We want to make employees aware of what the rules are and the rules of engagement are around project fraud management. We will have internal controls in place. We will hire experts. We will lead by example. We will have minimum things in place, such as keeping a track of vacation balances. Something as simple as this. There's a case study online where there was an organization, an insurance company out of San Diego, that had a couple of employees in a particular department who simply just would not take a lot of vacation. In fact, there was close to zero vacation. So that may sound like a loyal couple of employees, but it really was a sign that these employees may have had something to hide, and that's exactly what the case was at this workers' comp company. So they had something to hide. They were worried that someone else would detect their fraud when they would be out of the office for a certain period of time. So it's a good idea to encourage associates on your team to take vacation time. It's a good idea to rotate project team members for various roles within the company. It just reveals fraudulent activity, as it allows another employee to review the activities of the first. So that's a simple, for example, strategy that comes into play. Again, from a detection perspective, you've got to have detection mechanisms in place, right? The visibility of these controls is one of the best deterrents to fraudulent behavior, and you've got to continuously monitor and update your fraud detection strategies to ensure that they're effective, because the fraudsters are 5 steps ahead of us, and we're just busy running behind them, at all times. Unfortunately, that's just the reality of what's going on in the industry out there today. Alrighty. So at this point, and I do apologize for the delayed start today. I decided to just trim it down just a little bit in terms of my presentation today, so I could open the floor up to some additional questions. My last comment will be that it's important that we follow best practices, right? So the teachings of Sarbanes-Oxley, for example, right, is very important. SOX equivalent requirements are being promulgated by other countries and other regions as well. We want to bring those into account. We want to take into account fraud around financial transactions, around credit, around collections, around receivables. We want to manage, fraud from every perspective, whether it's IT project management, whether it's construction project management, whether it's healthcare project management. And so we will leverage best practices. ISACA, for example, has several guidelines around this in the COBIT space, and the C-Risk certification track teaches participants on what to look out for from an IT risk management and IT fraud risk management strategy. and they now have launched some cybersecurity essentials. PMI's risk management professional track also talks about fraud risk management on projects as well. So leveraging best practices out there, and looking at case studies and learning from how other organizations have done it in other parts of the world would be a recommendation to see how we can build this into our culture and not accept the status quo is an important message. So at this point, Ali, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the floor up to questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Rizvi. Folks, we are open for the question and answers now. So if you have any questions, you can either put it in the question box, chat box, and I'll be happy to read them over on your behalf, or you could raise your hand. There's a hand icon available on your webinar console. So if you click on it, you will be able to speak to the speaker. Let me go straight to see there is a hand been raised. So let me go straight to the caller. We have Mr. Sarat Ramachandran. Mr. Sarat, sir, could you please introduce yourself and ask the question? Sarat Ramachandran, can you hear us? I believe we have an audio connection. Let me go to another caller. We have Brother Mohammed Khalid. Brother Mohammed, could you please introduce yourself and ask the question?
Yeah, hello. My name is Mohammed Khalid. I'm a project engineer, instrumentation and control systems in Qatar Petroleum. And thank you for a nice presentation. My question is about, please tell some details about this ACFE, Certified Fraudulent Experts.
Sure. So thank you for the question, brother. I appreciate it. The Association for Certified Fraud Examiners is an association that runs a certification track. So you could actually go to the ACFE website, and there is a besides a formal certification track which is quite popular in, at least in North America, in the public sector. For example, if you're working for the Department of Defense, if you're working for any of those type of projects that involve the military, Navy, government sector, there's a need for a lot of ACFEs in there. There's some specific roles there where the ACFE designation is quite desired and encouraged. The ACFE content, even if you're not in that particular sector, even for the corporate world, the ACFE teachings are extremely valuable. There's a whole manual that they update every single year virtually, because there's so many changes that are taking place in the industry. So I would recommend that you spend some time on the ACFE website if you're interested in this whole area of fraud in general, and specifically even just narrowing it down to this vertical of just project fraud. There are some good practices, best practices, and again, you can stay abreast of trends and changes. Like I mentioned in my presentation, cyber fraud and cyber crime is becoming such a big concern right now for governments and corporate entities and even nonprofits. Even the World Bank, for example, is really concerned about it right now. So ACFE has partnered up with several entities like that to build best practices. And typically, folks who are doing the CFE designation, the Certified Fraud Examiner designation, they would typically need certain years of experience, obviously, from the industry. They would either have perhaps a forensics background or an accounting background, an IT background, engineering background. So there's quite a variety. Someone who typically comes in with some years of experience and expertise would probably be a good candidate for that certification track.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Brother Mohammed Khalid, for your question. Let me move to another caller who's raised his hand. We have Brother Adil Khan. Brother, could you please introduce yourself and ask the question?
Yes, I'm Adil Aslam Khan. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, I'm Adil Aslam Khan. I'm working in Saudi Arabia in construction projects. I'm working as a planning engineer and project control system engineer in a project management company. I'm working with consultants. I would be more interested. I believe that this project for this topic is related to the risk management as well, and I've been involved in risk management before, but I have never been involved in. I have never heard too much about project fraud before. Could you please tell me regard research point of view, academic point of view, how much has been done in as a research in project fraud, and what could be the new topics in project fraud? I would be interested in doing my master's.
Absolutely. This is an area that's a very good question. There's this whole area of, you know, fraud that is just, I don't even know where to begin. I mean, you know, all I can say to you is that this is such an exponentially growing area, unfortunately, because with the growth of technology and the capabilities that are there now, it's become so much easier, unfortunately, for fraudsters to, you know, whether it is, you know, identity theft or cybercrime. I mean, look, you know, if you're asking about the research that's going on here, it is extremely heavy. I'm associated with the Schema Business School out of France, where a doctorate in project and program management is run, and there 2 or 3 of my colleagues are doing research specifically in this particular space. It's an extremely popular area. Cybersecurity essentials courses are being launched by ISACA. There's a whole new certification track that has just come out in that particular space. In terms of research, you know, I've got a case study that I use in one of my MBA classes, which is from the World Bank from the year 2000. Again, I repeat, it's from the year 2000, from 15 years ago. Corruption and kickbacks, and, you know, you name it, you know, everything from the top down is a significant concern to the World Bank. And, you know, citizens of the world like you and me are paying the price for that, right? When there are corrupt contract amendments, when there's overbilling and overpayment, when there's lower than the specified quality delivery taking place in these World Bank projects, when there's flagrant theft going on, unfortunately, right, that is taking place. There are a number of cases, and again, if you drop me a line later, I'm happy to share with you some of that research that I use and some of the case studies that I use in my class. I'll be happy to share that with you. And send. There are several case studies there that I use from the World Bank. And again, some of this is as old as, some of it's more recent, but some of it's as old as 10, 15 years ago. So there's a lot of research taking place in this space. And whether we like it or not, it's just going to continue to get messier. It's not going to become a prettier world anytime soon, unfortunately.
Well, thank you very much, Brother Khan, for an interesting question. Now let me move to the question box. We have a short one from Brother Hazim Abdullah. The question is, anonymous reporting system to report project fraud might reduce the project manager's morale. Do you agree?
It might reduce the project manager's morale. Well, that's an interesting comment. I mean, there's always a concern with anonymous reporting, obviously. You know, like any sort of anonymous data collection. The reason that, you know, a lot of researchers, for example, like, you know, one arm of my life isn't spent in the area of research, and one thing as a researcher that I don't like is anonymous data collection, is that, you know, you don't really reliably know that this data, how valid it is. Right? So more than project manager morale or project leadership morale, I think the bigger concern for me would be someone who just has a grudge against someone and is just trying to, you know, quote unquote, frame another participant, or a fraudster who is intentionally misleading by you know, reporting a concern in an area B so that they can partake in a fraud in area A. Those are some of the bigger concerns I would have around the anonymous reporting. So it has to be taken with a grain of salt, but it does open up the conversation and at least alert executives to you know, certain potential activities. And, you know, again, from a risk management strategy, while there are pros and cons, you know, it can be debated. my personal assessment is that there are advantages to this as opposed to disadvantages. You know, large organizations like Boeing here in the United States, it's a client of mine, and Boeing I know has an anonymous reporting system, an anonymous sort of, they don't call it whistleblowing, but anonymous reporting system they have in place. Because again, we're talking about, several $100 million contracts there. And so, it's built into the culture. But there are, no system is going to be perfect, and that's why you'll have a multifaceted approach to risk prevention in general and specifically project risk prevention as well. But thank you for that question.
Thank you very much. Another small one from Brother Mumtaz. The question is, I think wasting organizations' resources is also like a fraud. Could you please tell us how to control it?
That's a very good point. We have a fiduciary responsibility, right? At the end of the day, the resources that we are utilizing at work is with someone's permission. It's someone's money at the end of the day, some investor's money, be it government, be it private sector, be it a publicly traded company. And that sense of responsibility needs to be conveyed to your associates, to your employees. First of all, you need to, drink that Kool-Aid and believe in that message. And that's a very, very important point. And that is why, in estimating, they say that keep it tight. They talk about, there's this idea known as Parkinson's Law. And Parkinson's Law talks about the idea that, let's say, I give you a project task that you can do in 5 days, right? But I give you 15 days to get it done. So I say, brother, you can get it done in 15 days. Well, guess what? You're probably going to take all 15 days. You'll fill the gap that you're given. You'll fill the capacity that you're given, even though you could have done it in 5 days. The same idea applies to other resources. I give you 50 bricks. You could have built this wall with 10 bricks. Chances are you're going to end up using a lot more than 10 because I've given you 50 bricks. So you keep it tight. You keep your estimates tight. You keep a close eye on resources. You double, triple check critical estimates, and you monitor and control. You build checks and balances in place. You build inspections in place. If you're dealing with vendors, in the contract you build in audits. So you say that, for example, I will come in and do 2 audits a year on this project. I would bring in an independent third party such as Deloitte or Booz Allen Hamilton or IBM. I'll bring in a third party to do, to conduct audits, so that there's that very clear, objective assessment from the outside. Good question.
Thank you very much. We have another caller raised hand, Brother Ahmed. Sayyid Ahmed, could you please, brother, introduce yourself and ask a question? Brother Ahmed, can you hear us? Okay. Let me go to the question box. We have another one from Stuart Abela. The question is, this isn't much a question, but would like to get your opinion. Clients have a habit of delaying projects in the Middle East by not making decisions. Inevitably, the contractor is requested to accelerate in order to meet the program deadline. But when they submit their acceleration claims, the client shouts fraud.
Well, you know what? I'm so happy that this is a problem in the Middle East, because you know what? This is also a problem in Los Angeles, where I live. So I'm glad that it's not only a problem in Los Angeles. But jokes aside, this is a concern. This is managing stakeholder expectations from the beginning, and this is where experienced project leaders and experienced leaders and managers are able to effectively facilitate decision making earlier rather than later. This whole idea of delays in decision making, again, I go back, I have so much respect for the Project Management Institute and its teachings, because again in the PMBOK guide they focus a lot on a tool and technique called facilitation techniques. And there's something called facilitation techniques that they talked about in that PMBOK guide. And the focus of facilitation techniques is to help reach decisions, intelligent, rational decisions. And for a number of reasons, there are delays in decision making, either just because it's convenient not to make a decision. You don't have to be responsible for it. You want to leave your options open. Or you're simply just being lazy, which is, again, not a human element that is restricted to a region, believe it or not. It may appear more prevalent there, but it unfortunately happens just about everywhere. And so you really have to, as project leaders who are put in that, the captain's seat, that collective team in the cockpit has to fly this plane through every kind of turbulence, including the delays in decision making. So I think setting a tone from the beginning, in the kickoff meetings and in your planning stages early on, that meetings will be held, within defined timeframes where people will be expected to turn up so decisions can be made. For example, at Amgen, which is a company here where I live in Southern California, Amgen is one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in North America and perhaps in the world. Amgen has a rule. No meeting will take place in the Amgen building unless there's a significant decision maker in the meeting. There's no point in having a meeting. There are these informal meetings, that's fine, but any formal meeting in general requires a decision maker in the room so that at the end of those 45 minutes, a decision is made. Instead of just having, a casual conversation for 45 minutes of what could happen, at the end of the 45 minutes, an actual decision is made. That's the key element. So, you have to push for a culture and a tone of making decisions. Otherwise, we could have lots of meetings, lots of conversations, and no decisions being made. That's a problem that really you have to nip in the bud early on. And I do agree that that's a huge waste. It affects the schedule. It affects your budget because you're paying employees, you're paying vendors, you're paying participants to attend these meetings where conversations are taking place. You invite 10 participants to a meeting, and each participant is getting, the average burn rate is, several hundred real or dirhams. Well, then, by the end of it, you're spending several thousand just to have a meeting where no decisions are being made.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Another caller raised hand. Let's see. Jinsen Papachan, you've raised your hand, please. Could you please introduce yourself and ask a question? Jinsen?
Hello.
Yes, Mr.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can
Yes,
hear you.
please go.
Hi.
Yeah. Please ask.
Hi, Jensen Papachan. I'm working as a project manager for Sama Telecommunication in Oman. My question is, could you please advise and give few valuable points to make it a proper detection, fraud detection system for a telecom company?
Fraud detection for a telecom company. Well, the first thing is, of course, I'll just give you some general rules around what should be in place and what makes sense. I'm sorry, I heard some background noise there. But the first thing is you have to build a traceability track of some sort, right? So you've got to collect and keep evidence. And you don't know what the evidence is right now, so you've got to keep log files. IT systems, banking, financial systems. We have set up with Amdocs, which you may be familiar with since you're in the telecom space. For the largest telecom provider in Canada, I've worked on a program where we built in all kinds of log files for collecting data that later on may be useful for a number of reasons, including potentially fraudulent activity. So the first thing is you've got to have the data in place so you can make informed decisions by analyzing that data, by following, a track. The second thing is, the general comment I'll make there, again, very specifically, but is that, use simple things. Don't make it overly complex and complicated. Okay, use simple tools like control charts where you're tracking trends and behaviors. You're seeing an anomaly. There was a very simple case of a credit union here in the United States. Again, I know it's not a telecom example, but I will tell you a very simple example of things where you can track things. There was in this credit union, there was one particular branch, if I remember the story correctly, where there was an excessive procurement of coffee taking place. That's fraud. You know, you've got 100 branches across the country. 99 branches consume a certain amount of coffee. The 100th branch is an anomaly. That gets picked up by the central headquarters, and the investigation takes place. It turns out that there was an employee who was ordering extra coffee and selling it on eBay. So you track trends like that. You track anomalies like that. And actually the telecom space, I mean, you are perhaps in one of the leading edge spaces for that kind of work. You know, I live in the United States, and, you know, after 9/11, the unfortunate sad incident of 9/11, the Patriot Act kicked in, right? And the Verizons of the world and the Sprints of the world and the AT&Ts of the world that I deal with here in North America, they, through the Patriot Act, they're able to track every single word I say online, every single cell message, every single text message, every single email, every single Facebook prompt that I post out there is able to be tracked by the Patriot Act, you know, through unstructured data, structured data, what have you. So, you know, the technology is there, the tools are there. I would suggest, my advice to you would be to reach out to the best of breed vendors. You know, in the GCC, you're generally blessed with being able to afford to deal with the best of breed vendors. Reach out to the Gartner reports, reach out to the best of breed vendors, and leverage their tools and their guidance to, you know, make your, you know, to mitigate project, you know, fraud in your particular industry.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Rizvi, for a very interesting presentation. That really brings us towards the end of the webinar. Any concluding remarks that you would like to give before we dismiss out?
Well, again, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of you today. Thank you for your time. If there are any follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer anything that I can and provide any value if I can give any assistance to any of you. Again, you know, my personal take, I think, is that unfortunately the world will continue to get messier. I don't want to predict a dismal end, but, you know, I see that there is, while there's a lot of chaos and concern in this space, there are proactive steps that we can take. There is a solution to just about every problem out there, and there's a lot of opportunity here from a career perspective, I think. I think this is an area that's just beginning to gain recognition. I know, for example, in Kuwait, several of the ministries now are just bringing, and I've got some friends who have just stepped in to provide consulting services around IT security and cybersecurity and cybercrime, and that's an area that's really taking on focus in what you would consider old school, you know, laid back ministry structure. So that's very proactive thinking by the government of Kuwait, for example, and it is something that you know, needs to take place in every sector, whether it's nonprofit, for-profit, corporate, government, you name it. A lot of opportunity here, I think. I think it's a great space to be in. Unfortunately, so, you know, it's an area definitely for you all to consider in terms of you know, career.
Well, again, thank you very much. I really want to thank you on behalf of MILE and PMI AGC for taking the time to share this very interesting topic in the presentation. Once again, thank you very much, Dr. Rizvi, and thank you all of those who participated in this webinar and for your interesting questions. As I mentioned earlier, that you are eligible to claim the PDUs from PMI AGC for this particular webinar. Instructions to how to claim the PDU will be sent to you via email in the next 24 hours. So please stay tuned to your email. You will receive the instruction guide to claim the PDUs from PMI AGC. We are recording this webinar, and so stay tuned to MILE community to access the presentation copy and the recorded version. So, for our